It will provide an overview of Germany's foreign policy and information on things such as defence spending. It's expected to address what the government views as growing military, economic and social threats. The three coalition parties had promised to work on a strategy in November 2021, but the idea gained urgency after Russia's invasion of Ukraine shed new light on the state of the German military. For more on this, let's speak to DW's chief political correspondent, Nina Haase. Nina, what can we expect from this strategy?
Well, Ben, I just received about a minute ago a copy of Germany's first ever national security strategy, and I've only had time to read the introduction by the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. So first up, I would like to stress that it has been kept under wraps. They were very, very careful not to leak anything because it is the first time that this government is actually trying to integrate all sorts of aspects, all sorts of ministerial responsibilities as well when it comes to laying out the groundworks for just where Germany sees itself in the future, who needs to do what, where do we need improvement in terms of resilience, in terms of preparation, etc. And Olaf Scholz in this introduction speaks of an integrated security approach that encompasses, of course, the threats coming from Russia's war against Ukraine, but also that he says the world is moving towards a multipolarity where Germany needs to be better prepared, it needs to diversify, and that includes also making sure that trade routes are safe. Then they address the topic of the climate crisis. And in a nutshell, I would say what I'm taking away from this so far, without having heard the details, of course, is that Germany, for the very first time, is actually trying to improve its strategic thinking. For a very long time, German governments were living under the impression that external threats were sort of manageable and that you could live on a day-by-day basis. This is the very first time that the German government is giving the country a strategy because things can go wrong. Russia's brutal war against Ukraine is challenging the European security order, but it has also led to this process that Germany wants to be better prepared when it comes to threats from the outside.
Nina Haase, our chief political correspondent, will let you sift through that document. We're watching live pictures now of the press conference, and I believe we can go over now to see what Olaf Scholz and his ministers have to say. They're just setting up that press conference as we speak. As you heard from Nina, this would be Germany's first national security strategy of modern times. It's a lengthy document that has been years in the making and will be very interesting to shed some light on Germany's defence spending, its defence strategy, and also its role in the world, of course, as a global player. Nina, we will, while we're waiting for them to set up, is there anything else you want to say when it comes to spending on defence? Will Germany commit to NATO's request for its members to spend at least 2% of their GDP on defence?
Yes, and that is probably the biggest news story of the day. Germany is writing down in this national security strategy paper that it is committing to the 2% goal. That means 2% of the country's GDP will, over a couple of years, on average, be spent on defence. And that is, of course, a result of the time.
Nina, we'll come back to you in a moment. First, let's cross over to that press conference with the Chancellor Olaf Scholz.
Presenting the national security strategy, and for that I welcome very warmly Federal Chancellor Olaf Scholz. Also, I would like to extend my warmest congratulations on your birthday on behalf of the executives, and also wish you the best of health, of course. So, beside him, Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock, Federal Minister of Finance Christian Lindner, and to my left, Federal Minister of the Interior Nancy Faeser and Minister of Defense Boris Pistorius. A warm welcome to all of you. The Federal Chancellor and 4 ministers at the same time. This is something we haven't had, at least since 1978. This is what is in the archive of the Federal Press Conference. In 2001, we had 6 female ministers for the Women's Day here. That was the highest number, but without the Chancellor. Otherwise, we had the Chancellor with 3 ministers in the 70s and 80s. For example, Mr. Schmidt on the budget. Maybe we can repeat that. Before we start, here's one more comment. We're transmitted live. The Federal Press Conference is not an institution of the federal government. This is what is important for us. It's an independent association of journalists. We hold press conferences such that our members can report about the federal policies in a more well-founded way. And here's a second comment for the questions and the people in the room. Right at the beginning, I only want to accept questions that concern the national security strategy. Other questions after that, please, but we should sort that a bit. So, these were my preliminary comments. Over to you, Mr. Scholz. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Indeed, it is relatively unusual if the Federal Chancellor, together with other important ministers, comes to the building of the Federal Press Conference. I'm aware of that, but the Federal Cabinet today has an unusual and very important decision it has made. For the first time in the history of the country, we have a national security strategy for Germany, which we have worked up. It used to be called a white paper and was limited to defense policies, and now it follows a much more comprehensive, systematic approach that comprises many agencies, ministries and trades. The lion's share of that work was done under the auspices of the Foreign Minister. This is why I want to extend my warmest thanks to Annalena Baerbock and the team of the German Foreign Office for their relentless commitment and for their work that allowed that work to be at hand 18 months after the government took office. Also, I thank all other members of the federal government, some of them are represented here, for the very constructive deliberations of the past months. In the negotiations on the formation of the coalition, we had agreed that we would work up such a national security strategy together. This was before the Zeitenwende, the turning point in history, before the invasion in Ukraine, before the brutal war of aggression that has since been raging in the Ukraine, and before the explosion of the Nord Stream pipelines. I emphasize all these events to make clear how strongly the security environment has changed for Germany in the past 1.5 years. Despite all changes, it remains the core task of the state to ensure the security of its citizens without any qualifications, because without security there's no freedom, no stability and also no prosperity. Consistently, the national security strategy follows the vision of integrated security. It's not only about defense, the Bundeswehr, that is the military, but the whole range of our security, diplomacy, as well as police, firefighting forces, technical emergency services, development cooperation, cybersecurity, and the resilience of delivery chains. All these means and instruments must be dovetailed and work together in order to strengthen and protect the security of our country against external threats. The national security strategy, to say that clearly, is not an end point, but a starting point from which we will see a continuous process of collaboration between all state levels, business sector and the society to strengthen our security lastingly. Germany is a strong country, and this is why the tasks lying ahead can be tackled by us with a full confidence and trust. What remains central is our security policy identity. Germany's rooting in the European Union and in the transatlantic alliance, our deep friendship with France and our close partnership with the US. 3 things are key. Firstly, the strength of our democratic institutions. Secondly, the strength of our business sector. And thirdly, the coherence in our society. This is what is in focus for us, and it has to be in focus for all of us, always. Well, ladies and gentlemen, after these introductory works, I would like to ask Annalena to sketch the core points of the national security strategy before Christian will add some comments. And then we have time for questions. Annalena, go ahead. Thank you, and also a very good morning from me. As the Chancellor had already said, for us as the German government, this is a very special day because the Federal Republic of Germany, for the first time, has given itself a national security strategy. All of us had to learn with the brutal war of aggression of Russia against Ukraine that freedom and peace do not fall out of the skies. With the 24th of February 2022, it has become clear once more. Many of our neighbors, to be honest, have warned that Europe too is vulnerable. The decision in favor of the security strategy was made before the 24th of February, as you will be aware. In the coalition accord, we reached an understanding on having that national security strategy, but the Zeitenwende, the turning point in history our federal chancellor coined, showed the urgency of our necessity to change our position in terms of security, namely in an integrated way. Integrated security, this is first of all a technical term, but in fact it's quite simple. Integrated security, this means that all relevant players, means and instruments play together and work with each other so much that the security of our country can be maintained in a comprehensive way and continues to strengthen us and protects us against other threats. Because the challenges to our security can be found in all realms of life. Security in the 21st century, this is more than just military and diplomacy. Security in the 21st century, this means in the pharmacy to be able life-saving medication reliably. It means when chatting with friends not to be spied on by China or when scrolling through the social networks not to be manipulated by Russian bots. Security, however, also starts for every one of us in the morning when we're in the shower with clean water, hot water, and the certainty that quality of it is checked time and again. Some may say now, especially in view of the last months, we have had many discussions about things which is really good. It's quite clear that clean water is part of security or that our gas storage facilities are well filled. But this too indicates what this Zeitenwende has meant, namely what has become natural for all of us in the last 12 months was not so easy 12 months ago. I was a member of the Economic Committee at that time, and the largest gas storage facility in Germany, the BASF storage in Reden, was sold to Gazprom. And perhaps in technical committees, only there was a question and debate about whether this is a security question, but obviously this was assessed in a different way. So faced with this Zeitenwende, this turning point in history, this government has set the course in an important way for the security of our country with the national strategy. If you see something on page 55 that has already been implemented, like, for example, that Robert Habeck overnight basically has made sure that this gas storage facility could be brought back and filled, then we consciously, based on our responsibility, we did not wait for this day of the press conference and the presentation of our national security strategy, but it's right to say, working in writing. This was the process of this national security strategy, and many things of these have already been implemented. So we have set ourselves a program of work. As the Chancellor said, this is a starting signal for our joint security. First, in the field of military preparedness, the protection against violence and war, and the protection of inviolability of our life, everything to be put on track. Secondly, in the field of resilience, namely the ability of our democracy to resist and our market economy to resist constraints and dependence from outside. And thirdly, in the field of sustainability, the protection of our natural resources, in particular, with a view to the climate crisis. Now, it matters to root this work program in the entire society. This is why this security strategy is not a strategy of the government alone, but of our entire society. The Russian war of aggression has showed that too, namely that the decisions we make can only be lived in a safe and secure way if a city that steers its sewage treatment plants also employs that security. Also in hospitals, hacker attacks to power distribution centers or hospitals must not be allowed to lead one of the biggest national security problems. So this is why this national security strategy is directed to the federal government, also to universities, municipalities and the people in our country. And this national strategy, and this is also the way it's embedded, will only work if we anchor it in the transatlantic and European context. This makes us strong. And this is why the Federal Chancellor and the Bundestag have ensured that we make more money available for the German Federal Armed Forces. The Minister of Defense will talk about that, because a secure Europe ready to act and a united, strong NATO also mean that not just 2% of our gross internal product is made available for that, but also combine our capabilities in Europe such that they are interoperable and can interact and play together. Integrated security also means that we as European Union, together with our partners in Asia, Latin America, the Middle East and especially Africa, we will in future cooperate much, much more than what we have already done. Integrated security, this also means that in our foreign and business policies, in terms of trading, not just take the interests of our partners even more strongly into consideration, but also that in infrastructure projects we also take into consideration that it's not just a network of roads and bridges and railways, but a geopolitical matter, and sometimes also a matter of power, and that the European Global Gateway Initiative has been designed along these lines. Like we want to put forward integrated security, especially with our partners in the European Union and the United Nations, this means that integrated security also means internal and external security to be combined. This means that security is not just as a sign of resource, but jointly. This sounds trivial, but beforehand it was different. And this is why I also want to emphasize the thanks for the work on that security strategy. The Foreign Office of Germany coordinated that, but every agency itself took a close look at what does security mean to us, including the ministers not present here today, like the Ministries for Development, but also the Health Minister, the Minister of Economics, and all other ministers, like including research and education. And the security externally is also a yardstick we apply on ourselves. Every one of us checks what does that mean to our agency and how can we cooperate. The Foreign Office, for example, is now launching a data platform where with one click you see on an interagency basis where the BMZ, BA, BMG, several ministries promote things worldwide. You may think this is logical, but exactly that was not around in the past. A geopolitical approach to external policy action, which also includes development policies, health policies and others, so that we not just give money to others in the world to support them, but that the geopolitical component is also taken into consideration. And this not just here, but around the world. All parts of the society want to be reached out to. This is what we want to do, especially women and marginalized groups, because we know if 50% of the society is not safe, no one is safe, like in our country. So in this sense, this day today is special for us, because in this new phase of German foreign and security policy into which we have long entered, there is now a strategic localization which we give all of us. In a phase where Germany is the biggest country in the EU, with the Zeitenwende of the Federal Chancellor, has not just coined a new term in the English language, but a time when our partners in Europe and the world feel that they can rely on our country like we have for decades been able to rely on others. Thank you.
The German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock speaking there at a press conference on Germany's new national security strategy, something that modern Germany never has had. And to talk about that, let's go over to our chief political correspondent, Nina Haase, who's been looking through that document as it was released just prior to the press conference, where we also heard from the German Chancellor, who talked about and made reference to a turning point in history, a quote he made when Russia launched its full invasion of Ukraine. He said that Germany is a strong country, but that they had already started working on this strategy long before the war. Tell us, what have they managed to bring about today in that document, Nina Haase?
Yes, that is something, of course, this term that is being used internationally as well by foreign ministers worldwide, that Zeitenwende, the tectonic shift, essentially, in policy, that Olaf Scholz used when he described just what an effect Russia's brutal war of aggression against Ukraine has had also on Germany. In this document now, they're trying to draw lessons, the lessons from previous mistakes, from a period where Germany was living in sort of a fairy tale mode, thinking that threats were far and beyond, that peace here in Europe was not going to be threatened to the extent that Germany would be affected itself. And these lessons they've now tried to sort of pour into one comprehensive document. And this goes beyond, and this is what the Chancellor Scholz and Annalena Baerbock, the foreign minister, stressed, it goes beyond defense. It goes beyond defense capabilities and what to do to strengthen the German armed forces, because, of course, connected to the Zeitenwende, that tectonic shift, was the announcement that the Bundeswehr, the German armed forces, would be equipped a lot better because they were in a poor state. But now this government is saying we need a more comprehensive approach. They call it integrated security, and they say that all relevant players have to come together and have to coordinate and have to make strategic decisions as well, because security is not just defense, it is also resilience. It starts, Annalena Baerbock said, with having clean water to drink in the mornings. It can lead to how to react to a pandemic, because of course we're still learning lessons from COVID and the kind of effects that that had on global trade, for example. So it is the first time that the government is trying to pool everything, all the tools that it has together, and to think strategically about how to be more resilient. They have identified 3 key words. They say we need defense capabilities, resilience, and sustainability. And so they understand security as something where Germany needs to just essentially sit down, prepare, and have the tools ready for when things go wrong, because this is something that German governments in the past have neglected. They sort of led the country through economic boom times. They made business deals with people worldwide, but there was no strategic thinking. There was no strategic plan. Of course, when it comes to defense capabilities, one thing that is very clear, that is a result of the Zeitenwende, is that Germany is now committing itself also in writing to the 2% GDP goal of defense spending. That is something that NATO has wanted for years, and Germany has now put it down on paper. It doesn't mean that it has to fulfill that goal every year. It can also be spread over a couple of years. If you spend 1% one year, you can make up for that if you spend 4% in the following years. And that is definitely one of the clearest results that is in this paper.
OK, well, let's talk about those 3 points: defence, resilience and sustainability. We did hear from the foreign minister there that there would be more money for the defence forces. And as I mentioned, we heard from Olaf Scholz that Germany is a strong country. But how strong is Germany? How would you describe Germany and its armed forces to someone who hasn't been to Germany before or doesn't know much about the country?
It has a lot of catching up to do. Germany relied on strong partners like the US for years. They definitely contributed to keeping Germany safe here at the heart of Europe. And of course, now with Russia's war against Ukraine, the war has come back to essentially Germany's doorstep. Germany doesn't share a border with Ukraine, but it is in the neighborhood. Germany is supplying Ukraine with weapons. That was a massive rethink also by German politicians. But before that, arms were only exported to non-active crisis regions, and the government threw that principle overboard when they decided to essentially support Ukraine for as long as it takes. That is something that the Chancellor Olaf Scholz always stresses. But that means, of course, what does the Bundeswehr, the German armed forces, have at home to protect Germany itself and also to play a more active role when it comes to other crises around the world? Now, this is something where Boris Pistorius, the defense minister, is making it very clear we need to step up there as well. We don't want arms spiraling upwards globally, but of course we also need to take it more seriously, that we can't, Annalena Baerbock put it that way, we can't expect peace and freedom to fall from the sky. We need to do something at home, and that is requiring a massive rethink here, where German citizens are not used to seeing soldiers in the streets. They're not necessarily used to connecting the Bundeswehr with something positive. And this is something that is definitely also a result of Russia's war against Ukraine, that people are beginning to understand if you want to live in peace, you need to do something about it. And that requires also a strong army.
And briefly on resilience and sustainability, how do you make Germany more resilient and more sustainable?
Resilience is definitely the biggest part in this paper. And to be honest, Ben, to me, this reads like, OK, hey, we need to wake up now. We need to actually also take into consideration the possibility that things can go wrong, and we need to be prepared for that. So it starts with having enough natural resources at home if global trade routes fall apart because of a pandemic. It also means, what do we do if there's a natural disaster that is caused by the climate crisis? Maybe we need to have emergency plans in place so that emergency workers can be activated really quickly. And all of this is having to be done in the federalist structure that Germany is, so where the regions play a very important role. Germany's lessons from Nazi history is not too much power can be concentrated here in Berlin. Not one person should be the sole person to make responsible decisions. But of course, you need to have a system to coordinate all these different actors, and that is definitely one of the biggest attempts by this national security strategy paper.
Our chief political correspondent, Nina Haase, on a special day for Germany, according to the German foreign minister, Germany's first national security strategy. Thank you. To the US now, where former US President Donald Trump has pleaded not guilty to criminal charges. He illegally kept two top-secret documents, at his home in Florida. He lashed out after a court appearance in Miami, claiming he was the victim of a political witch hunt designed to stop him becoming president again next year. It's the first time a president has been indicted in a federal case. Trump could go to prison if found guilty.
On the eve of his 77th birthday, Donald Trump at a Cuban restaurant in Miami.
Are you ready? Food for everyone. Food for everyone.
Showing little sign he's feeling the pressure, despite the long list of charges against him. Earlier, the atmosphere around his procession to court appeared more like a festival than a high-stakes legal case, with hundreds of fans waiting for a glimpse of the former president. Recent polls put him well ahead of his rivals in the race for the Republican Party's presidential ticket, with 81% of Republican voters viewing the charges against him as politically motivated.
President Trump is innocent. This is just a witch hunt against a candidate running for office.